Forward. All right, so welcome to Strategies and Perspectives on How to Scale Up Regenerative Organic Agriculture. My name is Alex Groom. I'm the Program Coordinator for Grow Ahead and Project Coordinator for Regeneration International. And today we're going to be hearing from 3 leaders in the regenerative agriculture movement. But before we get started, I just wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. If everyone could please keep their mics muted throughout the webinar, that would be fantastic. It would help audio for our speakers today. So I hear some background noise. If maybe Precious, I'm going to want to mute your mic for a second before we get started with you. Please post your questions in the chat. We're going to save 10 to 12 minutes at the end to cover questions that come up throughout all 3 presentations. And just a reminder that this webinar is going to be recorded and disseminated for anyone who couldn't make it. So we're currently recording. So let's just jump right in. So we're going to start with Precious. Precious is a training and development specialist in regenerative environmental issues and community organizing. She's from Zimbabwe. She recently founded an organization called Earth Wisdom, which is a network based in Zimbabwe. And so let's just go right ahead and hear from Precious. Precious, why don't you start us off?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Welcome online. Okay, so I'm going to share just briefly on how we can make the most on community engagement to scale up regenerative agriculture. Maybe just a little bit about myself. As Alex has already said, I'm a field professional who is trained in communicating holistic management and different regenerative agriculture techniques to communal people, communal lands, and professionals who educate other communal lands. So maybe to bring it in context, communal lands would be your ideal small-scale farmers in rural Africa or Zimbabwe. Why is it important, I feel, to talk a bit about smallholder farmers? It's because, as you know, in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa alone, about 80% of the food that sub-Saharan Africa and Asia comes from smallholder farmers. Just 80% of the productivity. So that's very important that we engage them. And in my country alone, over about 70% of production comes from smallholder farmers. And that means they own a lot of land, and they are agro-pastoralists, which means they grow both crops and livestock, mostly cattle, goats, and sheep. So as you all know that in the movement right now, and there's lots of climate change talks and how we can help reverse climate change by building soil organic matter. So for me, this is very important. It's an important aspect of the movement because this is a big population that is responsible for land and cropping and farming. At the same time, we have to note that in context, there's been lots of industrial agricultural activities where people use fertilizers, GM seeds, and really unproductive methods of agriculture. So I'm just going to go straight into how we've been doing trainings and all sorts of activities to scale up and motivate farmers to use regenerative agricultural means. As I said earlier on that I'm an educator in holistic management, which is really a decision-making tool to make decisions that are sound economically, environmentally, and socially for the well-being of the human and all living organisms. So this picture here is just depicting one of the tools that we use in holistic management, which is holistic grazing, where we mimic nature. Here is herbivores and peck hunters. These are leopards, but we have lion, we have hyena, where wild life of animals evolved in the grasslands of Africa, being moved by these animals. And so as they moved, they left dung and urine behind. They were to group together to protect themselves against these big animals. And as they did that, they disturbed the soil. When it rained, then the grass was recovering, and we had lush grasslands, streams of water and everything. The picture at the bottom left is then what we use is a tool of well-managed livestock to then mimic that same atmosphere. And where animals have left, you see that. And I call holistic grazing a practice that keeps giving. Because when you manage your livestock well, you can only recover your land. You can only build soil organic matter. And it's very important right now because agriculture has been blamed for destruction of lands and actually aggravating climate change. But if you manage well...
Are you talking to me? I can't hear you because I'm on the...
Hey, Adam, can you
Oh,
please
I'm
mute your
sorry.
mic? Sorry.
Oh, I thought I was
Thanks.
muted.
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry about that. Sorry, carry on, Precious. Okay.
Okay, all right. So this is just a picture of the tool of animal impact and holistic grazing, which is well-planned movements of animals in different camps. We call them paddocks. And we do this can be done in private ranches and communal lands. But in communal lands, the game is different because you are managing a different land tenure system where land is commonly owned, and you have to sort of gain consensus with all communal people. So in my context, for example, in Zimbabwe, where I work, holistic grazing or regenerative agriculture doesn't only help lives and social beings or building up communities, but we live in a wildlife habitat area where we've seen lots of conflict between communal people and the national parks that are close by, or degrading lands, compromising populations of animals. So here we have sable, we have a bird, we have elephant, we have lions. All these are important in co-managing and building up soils. I'll start off with the first tool of scaling up, which is training. Training, in this case, as I say to you, in one community you can have like 150 households, so to speak. And so to get all these people on board, you have to have a skill of managing group dynamics, conflict resolution, and make sure that you involve everybody. This can start off from leadership. There are people that we call key voices in a community. They may not be in leadership, but then there are key voices who can influence for regeneration or against regeneration. And in this picture in particular, we were doing a grazing plan. So you get the community, we share the context, and we share the contextual knowledge, but the implementation and drawing of maps and drawing up of the grazing chart has to be done by the community. Unfortunately, in civil society, it's so tempting to do everything for the community, but I would not advise that because ownership is very important. And in this process, you have to be on your toes, so to speak, managing conflict. Having everyone's voice being heard is very important. So you have to have a skill of communicating, have the language in place. For example, don't talk about rest. It's better to say recovery, because rest can be misconstrued as leaving the land for a long time and you get oxidizing grass. But recovery means we're just grazing here, we will move for a bit, we'll come back again when our grass is recovered. And then spend as much time on the land with your groups. So we spend a lot of time talking about the land, what happens on the soil, what happens when the soil is bare, what happens when the soil is covered. It's important that you break down that technical knowledge into a language that people can understand. And while I'm still talking about breaking down the language, it's also important to speak to the hearts of the people, speak to what matters most to them, to water, to food, to security. That's what matters to people. But in instant, when they start implementing holistic management or permaculture or whatever that you guys are educating on out there, you achieve a lot of things, more than just security of humans. You achieve building up of soil organic matter and reversing many other effects of climate change. So because it takes all of us to really do this work, as part of my experience, we've worked in training other organizations in other regions to then go and impart that same knowledge. So partnerships are important. So you build partnerships, you build mentoring and coaching partnerships, where as a technical advisor, you keep visiting these organizations that are implementing, discussing their challenges and sharing experiences. So these networks are very important. They become like support groups, if you will. In communities, there are people that I call fire souls, which are people that have a desire to start helping you implement projects. And as facilitators or educators dealing with different communities, it's important to mentor them. This I find is very important because when you exit the community, for example, because you will not be there forever, it's great to have someone on the ground that the communities can relate with easily, their neighbor who has all this zeal and information. This is a guy called Vianney Ndlovu. He is a runner with communities. So you can co-facilitate with these people. I'm sorry about the barking dogs. So you have these people who can literally take over the movement, which I feel like they're important aspects in regeneration, because you need people on the ground, native people on the ground who can carry on the work. And then there's farmer-to-farmer exchanges, which I call inspirational visits, where people can go to the most important thing, the same place with the same weather patterns, same soil types, and especially rainfall. Because you do not want to take people to a high rainfall area. I come from a very low rainfall area of 450 mils to about 623 inches. So you don't want to take people to like 1,000 millimeter rainfall area, because they can even copy practices that will not work where they come from. So when you're dealing with farmers, take coffee growers to coffee growers, maize growers to maize growers, small grain growers to small grain growers, so that they learn and get inspired. This was one of the trips that we had in August, where we went to see water harvesting techniques, how people are still continuing to grow food even in the dry season by just capturing and making the most of rainfall water. Documenting. I feel like scaling up happens almost naturally when you have a good documentation system in place. This is what we do, what we call land monitoring, where you just monitor on the surface of the land to see the very first signs of whether you are changing your land according to what you had planned in your holistic context or not. So you document by that, you take photographs, engage community members all the time when you're taking photographs. The same group, it's important to engage the same group, because every year you see differences. What I've seen is that nature or earth is so forgiving, because in one season, you can see a huge difference. And when you miss one season of recording, you've missed a story for a lifetime. Because once you continue doing things right, you can only get better. Though it needs commitment to do that at the same time of the year, record and take photos of crop fields, show cover cropping when you're talking to other groups, show that you can have a livelihood. This is a community with a garden now because of the same farming techniques. Down below, we were going to a river system that is being consistently changed. The first sign that we saw was that grass is actually now growing almost in the river stream, which means we have stabilized the banks using livestock. And then the next thing, you can only have water flow, because there is good underground water recharge. So I'm going to briefly think of the next steps in growing the movement of regeneration. First is having partnerships across the globe, and according to how things apply in each area, have working partnerships so that you implement either holistic grazing, permaculture, water harvesting, biodynamics, everything that we feel will work to improve small-scale farmers' work. We need it, and therefore partnerships are needed. And well, that takes funding. I mean, conversation with policymakers. I'm talking about agricultural ministries, the UN, and all those platforms, to actually really bring out the message of regenerative agriculture, so that if it's trickled down, especially from governments, using government extension officers, I find them they're such a powerful tool to help advocate, because people naturally listen to policymakers. So it would help if we start bringing that conversation up there. And the last one is really keep inspiring, keep showing results, keep moving. And yeah, so that's it from my desk.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for sharing, Precious.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was fantastic and beautiful imagery. So for all those who joined during Precious's presentation, we're talking about strategies and perspectives on how to scale up regenerative organic agriculture. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat, and we're going to cover those at the end once our three speakers have had the chance to share today. And, you know, in the meantime, I'd love to hear just in the chat if you could post where you're calling in from. When we looked at the RSVP list, there are people from about 22 countries. So I'm curious to know who ended up coming, and I think that'd be really interesting for everyone. So let's carry on. Edouard Roulette is speaking next. Edouard is the co-founder and president of Alter Eco Americas, a pioneering fair trade and organic food brand distributed in stores across the US and Canada. So Edouard, do you want to share your screen and get started? That sounds
Hi,
great.
everybody.
Thanks for
I'm
joining.
trying to share my screen, but I think Precious needs to unshare first.
Precious, will you unshare? There you go. All right. Thanks, guys.
Just one second. All right. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay.
Thanks, Edouard.
She's a completely wrong slide. All right. Great. Yeah, it's quite amazing to see so many people from so different countries. It's really encouraging. I'm Edouard. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of a company called Alter Eco. We are a San Francisco-based fair trade and organic food company. We sell chocolate bars, chocolate truffles, snacks, and some other categories such as rice and quinoa. We sell in about 10,000 stores in the US, Canada, and Australia. Stores like Whole Foods, Kroger, Safeway, etc. The brand is also present in France, and it's owned and operated by a different group, but with the same idea and the same mission. We started in 2004. We started as what we call an alternative trade organization. And since then, we've evolved and really revolved around a concept that we call the full circle sustainability. So those are some of the products that we sell. Again, chocolate bars, truffles, quinoa, and rice for those who haven't seen those products in stores. Full circle sustainability, direct sourcing from farmers. I'll just give you a brief overview of our approach to sustainability before I dig into regenerative agriculture. But fair trade, direct sourcing from small farmer co-ops in developing countries, it's really our DNA. Support and direct sourcing from farmers, organic and non-GMO agriculture and sourcing and training is also part of our pillar. It's our second pillar. Promoting biodiversity and varieties, for instance, by cultivating other varieties of rice in Thailand than the main cash crops that you find there. Compostable packaging is something we've put a lot of effort and resources in. It's great to try to be sustainable, but when you're in the CPG space and you create a lot of a whole life of packaging, that's a big issue we've been working on with compostability especially, and carbon insetting, which I'm going to be talking about during this presentation. And just as a last note on this full circle sustainability, we're also a B corporation and a registered public benefit corporation. And in the US, that's really a way to put all those four pillars into our articles of incorporation, into the essence of the company, so that we can make sure that the mission is preserved as the company grows and evolves. Quick reminder on how our fourth pillar, especially the insetting, is fitting into this whole regenerative agriculture movement and standards. And so you have those three pillars in regenerative agriculture. One is soil health, the second is animal welfare, and social fairness. And so we are definitely more, what we are doing is more relevant with soil health and social fairness. We do source some organic milk and butter, and so those are some and honey and some animals byproduct, and all those, of course, as well have very strict standards, certification, and verification in terms of animal welfare. But we'll be mostly talking about soil health and fairness. So how the concept of insetting started for us back in 2007. So we visit our farmer co-ops a lot and spend time with the communities. And we were in Peru in one of our main cacao co-ops in the northeast, San Martin, and the co-op is called Acopagro. The story of this co-op is quite amazing. They used to be there in the primary forest in the Amazon, in the 90s, actually in the 80s, most of those farmers, they isolated, there's no roads, of course, just the river, were growing coca for the drug, and they were actually working under the shining path, and that was really their life. It was a difficult life. As a reminder, the Shining Path is and was a very active terrorist organization. And so when Fujimori, the president of Peru, came on board in the 90s, he united with the DEA to eradicate coca. And so those farmers ended up with no more revenue, much more peaceful life, but no revenue. And so that's where the United Nations Development Program came in and helped those farmers transition from cacao. And so their transition in terms of cultivation was great, except that those farmers had no outlet for their cacao. They decided as communities to cultivate organic cacao, and they were looking for a direct customer in the international market. And that's where Alter Eco came in. And we started sourcing directly from those farmers, and since then had very nice relationship and excellent cacao, of course, products from them. But so in 2007, we're there in Peru, and we realized that all the areas and their fields and around are completely deforested. And the main reason being that cultivating coca at the time in the 90s, they had to change and move all the time their fields, because the government was, of course, trying to eradicate those fields. And number two, the coca plant is very extractive in terms of soil and so and nutrients. So you have to move a lot so that you can get new nutrients every year, every time you have a new coca cultivation cycle. So anyway, so we're there and we see there's a big problem of deforestation, and we've seen that with actually other farmers, other countries in Brazil, etc. Sometimes small scale farmers need to eat, and to eat sometimes cut the forest. And so that's where the idea came up of saying, okay, well, so a lot of our farming communities are in tropical areas, and we have, we ship products around the world, and truck and ocean freight and all that. And so can we offset our carbon emission by working with our own partner farmers and replanting trees in our supply chain so that we can offset our carbon emission? So that's really the concept of insetting, and that's really offsetting your carbon emission, working with farmers that you already buy from in your supply chains. So this pilot project in this area of Peru, in the Alto Guayabamba, was extremely successful. Alter Eco is a relatively small food company, and so we actually it's not that we don't emit enough carbon, we don't have enough carbon emission, but the project became bigger than what we could offset. And so Tristan, who was the founder of Alter Eco in France at the time, and started Pure Projet, which is this kind of reforesting, insetting organization, kind of separated from Alter Eco to find other customers and scale those reforestation projects and insetting projects. So we became two sister organizations. And since then, so just in Peru, there's been over 2.5 million trees planted in this co-op. And then other customers, other companies have come on board to inset their emissions. Some of them, Ben & Jerry's, and some small and some large companies that are working with the same concept of using, not using, but working with their farmers and partner farmers to offset their emissions. That's, if you buy a bar of Alter Eco chocolate, you'll find inside the wrapper, we tell the story of our insetting program. So agroforestry, when we started working with a lot of the farmers we work with, you can see it's, mostly cash crops, or, just monocrops. There's, lots of soil erosion, slash and burns, etc. All those practices that you are all familiar with. And then agroforestry, which is really what we're implementing, is a lot of intercropping and shade growing, and having the farmers, if it's cacao farmers, they're going to plant mangoes, they're going to plant many other fruit trees and timber within their parcels and around their parcels. So in terms of insetting per se, some of it is agroforestry, some of it is afforestation, where we actually use and set money aside to actually conserve some areas. So we've done that a lot as well in Peru, in the Alto Guayabamba, which there's land that are in danger of being purchased by large corporation for exploitation. And so most of the time we do agroforestry, but sometimes we've also decided to do what we call afforestation. So you have all types of setup. You can see that here, intercropping is one model of agroforestry, but the model one that you see here, where we plant trees on the side of the rivers, etc., are also very useful for farmers and those communities because they really retain the soil and retain the water. And so when there was those big flood in Thailand about 5 years ago, really devastating floods, and the main reason for those floodings was mostly that they've been deforesting a lot, and there's nothing to really hold the water, no trees, and so those rivers, as soon as it rains a lot, those rivers are completely overflowing. So there's a lot of benefit in looking beyond agroforestry and how we can positively impact these communities. How do we do with Alter Eco? Every year we calculate, we have somebody at Alter Eco who calculates our full life cycle, the carbon emission of the full life cycle of our product. And so you have 3 measurements to do that. Either you do GHG scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. And the scope 3 is when you look at from the very beginning of when the life cycle starts for your product until the very end, meaning not just until you sell it, but after, when it goes in your distributor's truck and when it goes in the store. You look at how much energy it costs, and it creates an emission it creates for a store to sell your product, right? So you do some macro calculation about the use of light and energy, etc. While scope 1, which would be the smaller scope, is just, okay, how much carbon emission do I generate when those products are under my responsibility and ownership. So it's definitely a smaller and a tighter scope. Scope 3, sometimes you may have, if you have a partner who also offset their emission, you may have some overlap, but I think for us, it's we'd rather have some overlaps than some gaps. So we calculate our emission, including my travel to co-ops and any staff, commuting, members commuting, and salespeople, cars, etc. So office carbon emission as well. We calculate that, and then that's the first phase. Number 2 phase, we reduce. We find ways, whether it's again lights at the office, working with our co-manufacturers in other countries, or with the farmers, to reduce those emissions. And then the third part, the residual, is really what we offset through insettings. That gives us an amount of money and a number of trees, especially that we commit to plant every year with those farmers. So there's something really amazing about insetting, and that's really incredible when you go first, in just like monocrop areas, and then when you really start to see the impact of insetting in those communities, it's really incredible how you go from kind of a desperate and lunar landscape to a very virtuous circle. And the number of benefits with Pure Project. One time we published a paper about the 100 benefits from one tree, and that's amazing. In terms of insetting and reforestation, of course, carbon sequestration is the first and the reason why we first started that. Restoring biodiversity with multi-crop and reforesting empty parcels is also a big advantage. Improving water quality, as I also mentioned earlier, and water regulation. Avoiding soil erosion, really important and immediate result from agroforestry, and soil stability, which I also mentioned with the Thailand example. In terms of brand, it's inside our wrapper, but we believe it really creates a bigger, a more holistic dimension to just buying products, slashing a fair trade and an organic label, and giving that to the consumer and say, look, we're fine, we're good. It brings a bigger dimension with the consumers and also with the farmers. And I think one of the biggest benefits that we see is one of the biggest benefits are for the farmers and for their communities. And that's one of the. I mean, it's really incredible. The one of the first benefits is the increase in the yield of the product that they were producing. So in the case of cacao in Peru, we've seen increase of yields up to 3 times what it was before we started those programs. So very direct economic impact for the farmers. Multi-crop also provide additional revenue and some paths to food sovereignty for those communities. Again, growing mangoes and other fruit is really bringing a different variety and better food diets for the communities. And then the program includes, so it's all native trees that we replant, and some of those native trees we go on a program of 10, 20 and 30 years, sorry. And so the farmers are calling that their retirement plans, because 30 years later they're going to have some teak or some other trees, timber that they can sell and get pretty good revenue from it. So again, that's really what they call their retirement. So it's funny and it's really interesting to have this approach with communities where they have additional revenue from the fair trade trading that they have with cacao in the case of Peru, and then of course an organic premium that they also get, and then this kind of long-term. Okay, very good.
Sorry.
I'll accelerate. We'll put some pictures. It's more fun than charts. That's one of the farmers in Ecuador. You can see as well these multi-crops. Again, very community oriented. All those programs are completely relying on agro-technician and organic programs, and then the community implement them, whether it's a nursery or the reforestation. We provide money to the farmer to plant the tree and then maintain the tree for 30 years, taking into account that some trees are going to die throughout the process. So it's really the whole community, and all the communities are embracing, participating, implementing those projects everywhere. I'll just finish with a couple of pictures. It's we call it the power of the forest, because this is, it's 5 months difference. You're in the primary forest, in the jungle, and you can see, it's a bit of a Weight Watcher before after, but it's amazing to see, they're seated at the same exact spots in January 2016, in May 2016, and you can see how the trees are growing at a speed that's incredible. When we go there and visit, the year after, we plant our mini forest and mini trees personally as well, and it's great to see how those trees are growing and at the speed at which you can really regenerate those soil and places. So that's it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing, Edouard, on scaling up regenerative organic agriculture through insetting and agroforestry. We really love Alter Eco's community-based model and how you're using business to support the adoption of regenerative agriculture worldwide and to address climate change. And so next up, we're going to hear from Brian Zinn on crowdfunding for regenerative organic agriculture and climate solutions. Brian's the organic and fair trade coordinator for Dr. Bronner's and the director of Grow Ahead. He's been involved in the food justice movement at home and abroad for about 20 years, including work with organizations such as the Center for Environmental Law, Friends of the Earth Paraguay, Global Exchange, and Fair World Project. So we'll hear from Ryan for about 15 minutes before jumping into questions. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat and we'll cover those at the end. So without further ado, Ryan, would you like to share your screen and jump into the presentation? Thanks.
Very good. All right. All right. Well, thank you so much, Alex. And thank you to Regeneration International for co-hosting this webinar with us. And I want to thank Edouard and Precious for their fantastic presentations. I think there's a lot of overlap in some of the great work that's happening all around the world these days. And I'm really excited and hopeful for the first time in many cases. So thank you to all. So I'd like to introduce you to everybody to Grow Ahead. Grow Ahead was started about 3 or 4 years ago as an initiative of cooperative coffees, a group of roasters and importers here in North America that work primarily with fair trade coffee cooperatives in the global South. And over time, this platform was designed primarily to fund and pre-finance fair trade coffee containers. And over time, the market actually changed quite a bit, and the need for pre-financing wasn't as important as it was in the past. So in collaboration with Fair World Project, an NGO here in the United States that focuses on fair trade, we partnered with Grow Ahead to relaunch their program primarily to provide support for small-scale farmer organizations facing climate change, by way of creating initiatives and projects that really focus on climate resiliency. So as probably most everybody on this webinar knows, industrial agriculture is one of the main drivers in climate change and accounting for a pretty significant percentage of greenhouse gas emissions. And depending on who you talk to, it can range anywhere between 20 to 45% of global greenhouse gas emissions are a result of the global industrial food system. And one thing that is often overlooked is the very important role that small-scale farmers can actually play, not only in producing the vast majority of the food for the world, but on a quarter of the productive land, but also potentially in terms of sequestering carbon through agroecological or regenerative organic agricultural practices. And this is something that we would like to continue to support and enhance, considering the fact that really small farmers are in the crosshairs, so to speak. They face unfair competition, consolidated marketplaces, very little access to the marketplace, whether that's in their national market or abroad, and they face quite a bit of pressures. So one thing that we noticed is that we really wanted to create a platform in the way that consumers and organizations and individuals in the global north, particularly in North America, could provide funding and support for the initiatives that are taking place on the ground, in many of the same places that Precious and Eduardo are working as well. And really our focus here is to support what is existing and what is being generated by farmers and their organizations, so that way we can continue to enhance those projects with some solidarity funding. So there's a couple of ways that we can discuss what we would consider to be our kind of pathways to a regenerative future. Certainly there are great organizations like Regeneration International, for example, and others that really focus on educating civil society at large on the benefits of regenerative agriculture. And there's others, for example, that are now building the marketplace for regenerative organic agricultural products. I just returned from the Natural Products Expo East in Baltimore a few weeks back, and regenerative products are really the kind of the biggest buzz. Companies, particularly fair trade companies and ethical businesses, are really looking forward to generating the market demand for these products and working within their own supply chains. And as a result, there's all these great initiatives that are happening, like a regenerative organic agricultural standard that is being put forward by the Rodale Institute, Patagonia, Dr. Brodners, and others. So we see the important need for education and market demand. Now, the two sort of missing elements here, and they are sometimes overlooked, is really the capacity building, that training that farmers and within their supply chains need to be able to really scale out these regenerative and agroecological practices. And then secondly, the question is how do we fund this process? In many cases, small farmers in particular, but farmers in general, have very little access to capital and credit to be able to buy everything from seedlings or to enhance their production through things that are very beneficial, like compost operations or improving their energy efficiency at their production facilities. So this is where we saw an opportunity for Grow Ahead to be able to support that process through an online crowdfunding platform, which we just recently relaunched. And the way we do this is a couple of ways. One, we've noticed that capacity building is a primary concern. This is something that we've done in conjunction with producer groups throughout the developing world by surveying. We see the two primary functions there is funding farmer-to-farmer exchanges, which I know that Precious discussed, as well as scholarships to be able to train farm leaders within farmer organizations, and then providing a revolving loan program. So I'll talk a little bit about each now. So one thing that I think is really kind of the unknown element as far as really scaling out agroecological and regenerative farming practices is this notion of peer-to-peer, farmer-to-farmer training. And really, this is something that we've seen across the world over the last couple of decades, but it really took root in Central America, Mexico, and the Caribbean over the last 30 years, where farmers were really to be able to create a network of sharing and experimentation by working together within their community and with other farmers. I know Precious talks about this in great detail and some of the great work that she is doing. And what we've seen in my particular personal experience in Central America and Southern Mexico is that by facilitating and bringing farmers together, the ability to be able to share knowledge and then enhance that as they take that back to their home communities and farms and organizations is greatly enhanced when they have the opportunity to exchange that. And so what we decided was that this is one funding opportunity that doesn't get a lot of recognition or funds for that matter, whether it's in the global funding scene with big groups like USAID or DFID and others, or even within civil society organizations. And so Grow Ahead really endeavors to be able to raise funds to be able to facilitate these trainings. And so far we've been really successful in raising our first round of funding next month in Nicaragua in partnership with Cooperative Coffees. We've been able to fully fund through crowdfunding and foundation grants our first farmer-to-farmer training to bring together farmers and discuss many of the aspects that Edouard discussed in terms of agroforestry. And this will bring together representatives from coffee cooperatives throughout Latin America to be able to address and discuss those issues, and then in turn take those back to their home communities and then implement them. Similarly, we've got our second farmer-to-farmer training plan for early next year in Ghana, bringing together their farmer organizations, particularly those within the Fair Trade Network in West Africa, to be able to address the big issues of pests and disease and agroforestry, which is a big challenge, particularly in cocoa producing regions of West Africa. And we really see that as an opportunity to sort of plant a seed in a case as far as developing and scaling out this knowledge base. Additionally, we found that there's a need for farmer organizations to have opportunities for scholarships in the event that they have farm leaders or other technical staff in need of additional and advanced training. The landscape is really changing very quickly at the farm level, as many of you all know, especially with the widespread of pests and disease as a result of climate change, among other things. And so we, in consultation with farmer organizations, realized there was a huge need to be able to provide really specific and intense funding for farmers to attend advanced training so that they can go back and then train their cooperative or their farm organizations and their communities. And so we've been able to fully fund our first round of farm scholarships with COMSA, which is Organic Coffee of Marcala in Honduras. And they have a fantastic program which they call their Organic Diploma, where they bring together farmers, and it's an intensive 2-week process where farmers are trained up on regenerative and agroecological practices. And so we look to scale that out and continue that process of funding scholarships for farm leaders going forward, and we will likely rotate those locations and regions going forward. And then finally, Grow Ahead also has an important crowdfunding mechanism for creating loans for farmer organizations. One thing that we've noticed is that many farm organizations really lack either the capital and financing and credit to be able to implement many of these projects that will really build up climate resiliency in their communities. For example, agroforestry and intercropping are one of the top interventions that Project Drawdown has identified to not only feed local communities, enhance food security, all of the many aspects that Edouard talked about, things like biodiversity, water conservation, et cetera, as well as carbon sequestration. But the fact is to actually, start and replant, especially in degraded land, 1 hectare of dynamic agroforestry, costs in and around the range of $1,000 per hectare. And so our goal is to be able to facilitate those loans at very reasonable rates for farmers and farm organizations to be able to improve the work that they're doing and gain access to that capital without going into major debt in the process. And we see this as one thing that is really missing right now, particularly in the regenerative and agroecological sphere, as far as gaining access to that capital. So our approach really is the realization that we're a small organization. We don't have access to the millions and millions of dollars available at the global development scene, but our goal is to really fund and support what we would consider to be pollinators. In the same way that bees go around and do a fantastic job of pollinating, hundreds if not thousands of farmers, our goal is to support those farmers and farm organizations that will in fact scale out and pollinate all of this good skills and work within their communities and their neighbors in their regions. And so our goal is to really support those pollinators as we build up that capacity and that production base. So for us, Grow Ahead really operates on a couple of different levels. One, our big hope is to be able to partner with ethical businesses as they look to enhance and support the farmers within their supply chains. There is a great need to be able to provide ongoing training, access to capital and foundation grants for farmers to be able to really implement these regenerative practices on the ground. We see that from our perspective, our primary criteria for working with farmers is really to work with organized farmer organizations, particularly those that work in the fair trade sphere, because from our perspective, regenerative practices aren't just building up soil, for example, but it's really building that social capital and that social structure and supporting that as well. We want to ensure that any intervention, any improvement we have for the environment and for soil also help to build communities as well. And so those are really key criteria in terms of supporting projects, is finding projects that have a strong social component and those that can, in fact, have a real big impact by pollinating and spreading out the word.
Hey, 1 minute, Ryan.
Okay, great. Thank you, Alex. And then, like I mentioned, we really look to partner particularly with businesses that are developing within their supply chains different ways that they can take action on these issues, whether it's supporting those farmers in their supply chain, educating their consumer base, or really taking action like what Alter Eco USA does with insetting, or getting involved in the political and advocacy space through great organizations like the Climate Collaborative. And so we are just starting this whole process, and I just wanted to note, for example, one great organization that we started this partnership with, which is Maggies, probably one of the better and most ethical organizations in the United States in the apparel world that I know of. And they've done a great job of supporting and promoting the work that we do. And with that, I wanted to say thank you all. I know this was a very quick overarching presentation, but maybe now we can jump into some questions and comments and start the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks so much for your wonderful presentation as well, Precious and Edouard. We really appreciate you all taking the time to share more about your work in growing the regenerative agriculture movement. I hope everyone here is inspired by the strategies we've heard about today briefly in setting agroforestry, community development, peer-to-peer capacity building. I think there's so much potential here. So we've had a handful of questions. I'm going to start with the questions that were thrown out for Precious. So Precious, I'm going to read the 3 questions and then summarize those in a couple of minutes. That would be great. So the first one was, could you share data on the increase of organic matter in the soil during the years using holistic management? Second question, do you use supporting materials for training such as illustrations or videos? And if so, how effective are those materials in comparison to verbal sharing? And third, how many people have you trained and what are your goals going forward? If you could answer that in 2 minutes, we will all applaud you.
Let me give it a shot.
Okay.
In terms of soil organic matter, we use land monitoring to just monitor soil cover or litter cover. If that can work, I hope the person who asked that would work for them. In at least in 2 years, you can increase your soil cover by 40 to 50%. In 4 years, in some sites that we've monitored, at least 70% going up just on litter cover and soil cover. Unfortunately, we are not yet into carbon testing and stuff, but I'm hoping for, especially with the Survey Center in Zimbabwe, that we can start those kinds of testings. And then supporting materials, we have videos, we use pictures, we draw picture cards as art to show the work, and we also use demonstrations live on the land where people can actually go and do learning on the land. So we use both experiential, visual, and verbal learning to explain then the concepts further on. And then there's one about number of people. I'll give it in communities, which is per community you can have between 100 households and stuff. So I'll use first the Survey Center in Zimbabwe. They are impacting at least 16 communities in one region. And then we work also with like 10 communities in that same region. And then through partnerships, you cover a lot more communities across the country. So the numbers are anything about 72,000 people, but in the Wange region alone, it can be 50,000 people, if I were to estimate it, because we work in community numbers. So if you talk about community numbers, it's about 24, 25 communities. Is that good? 2 minutes?
Yeah, that's perfect. You really nailed that. So, I mean, we can really see from what you've explained how far-reaching peer-to-peer capacity building can be, and we're really inspired by that kind of work. So let's jump to the questions for Eduardo. So first one, do you try to quantify the carbon sequestration enabled by your soil improvement as a part of your bee company's mission? Second question, I'll just run through the 3 that came up, okay? And then you could do what Precious did and try and answer those in 2 minutes. Second question, with what kind of crops is agroforestry possible next to cacao? And the third one was more asking if you could share the paper on the benefits of a single tree. So perhaps we'll follow up on that to all the participants in an email after this. Thanks, Eduardo.
Okay, great. Okay. Yeah. So the measure. I mean, and that's it was a kind of appendixes in the presentation, which I didn't get to go through, which was methodology and processes on how all those projects are really implemented. But we don't we do the carbon sequestration measurements. We don't do it as part of the B status. We do it as part of the carbon offset certification. And so we work with VCS and gold standards, which was, the main certification standard and agencies for carbon offsets for around agroforestry and reforestation. And so that's where we actually need to show carbon sequestration, additionality, and all those, all those factors and measurement to get a project certified. So this is part of what we do. We do it either, we do it with third parties, of course. We do it internally as well. Pure Project does it internally. And then we have a separate but affiliated, not separate, but affiliated organization called Pure Lab, which is part of Pure Project, and which works with scholars in various universities, Yale and others in the US and in Europe, where we really try to dig deeper and really try to measure everything that we've been talking about. So carbon sequestration is one of the main factors, of course. One thing I will say that not all our projects are certified VCS or gold standards. The reason being that it costs a lot of money to certify, and then it's useful if we want to publicize a lot the fact that we're offsetting, and we actually we prefer to talk about our partnership with farmers and the number of trees we are planting, rather than add an additional layer of cost for certification on something we don't really, carbon offsetting is not really the main axis of what we communicate about. Second question, what other trees? So I mentioned a lot of fruit trees that we are planting with cacao, but in terms of timber, all of them are native trees. Caoba is mahogany. That's one of the native trees that we are planting. We are planting, I know the name in Spanish, cedro cedar, cedro nativo. We are planting palipero, caipirona, bolaina, shaina, Pinochincho. So those are the varieties that we replant, that we first, of course, grow in nurseries, and then replant alongside the cacao trees in this region of Peru. Some of it, there's a couple varieties like teca that we're planting as well. It's not exactly native, but it does provide a lot of revenue for the farmers. So we use it and we plant it with a lot of very cautiously, but the farmers really value selling, the possibility of selling that as timber in 30 years.
All right, that's great. Thanks, Edouard. So let's jump to questions for Ryan. Ryan, we have two questions. One, who are the main donors who give to Grow Ahead? Second one is actually quite a lengthy question, very important one from Erin Axelrod. She gives kind of a long background in the chat, so I invite everyone to read that, but I'm going to summarize, or do my best to summarize. So the question is, could you speak to the potential problems with the new regenerative organic agriculture certification, and how Rodale and the Certification Coalition will address some of these issues here domestically in the US to invite farmers in rather than calling them out?
Mm-hmm. Well, great. Thank you both for the questions. First off, as far as our current donors, we've been really lucky to have a combination of individuals, providing both loans and donations, as well as companies and some foundation donations as well, to be able to provide money for either the loans, the scholarships programs, or the farmer to farmer. So our real goal is to really try to engage individuals as much as possible, because the one nice aspect of the work that we do, or at least we think it's a nice aspect, is that there's a certain level of transparency in connection with the farmers, whereas with many other people asking for all of your money, you not exactly know where the money goes necessarily. So that's our goal, is to really be as transparent as possible as far as what happens. And so if you come and visit our website over the course of the next couple of weeks, you'll be able to see the progress with our first farmer to farmer training. Erin, you bring up a great point regarding some of the biggest issues we're facing now, particularly in the organic sphere, where many people are sourcing cheap, quote unquote, organics abroad. There's also questions about how organic is, what's the organic integrity of these projects. There's been a couple of great Washington Post articles detailing the risks of commingling and cheating in the organic space. And then of course, there's always examples of farmers, particularly in places like China and others, where labor standards aren't so high, so you're getting very, probably produced under production cost organics. So I don't necessarily think that one standard can actually solve those problems. I think there's going to be a combination of things that need to happen. But what I think this regenerative organic standard does bring to the table is a couple of things. One, it ensures that organics will include greater cost of production actually being incorporated, and that means by properly compensating farmers through whatever fair trade mechanism exists, within the standard, that ensures that there's less of an opportunity for people to, go and look for cheaper options overseas. That's not always going to be the case. For Dr. Bronner's, all of the oils we source are primarily things in tropical countries like coconuts and palm oil, for example, which cannot necessarily be produced here in the United States. But I do think that really being able to provide farmers with fair prices and true cross production is one way to go. And I think that this process gets us closer there, but there's a couple of other things that need to happen as well. So it's really in a way to maybe standardize and protect the term regenerative organic, since in a way there is a lot of people already talking about their products being regenerative with really no criteria or definition or accountability. So there's that concern as well. So sorry, that was a long, rambling, maybe unclear answer, but that's where we're at.
No, that's great. Thanks for sharing, Ryan. And thanks for that great question, Erin. Well, so we're already kind of over time, so I just want to thank everyone for joining us. This webinar has been recorded and will be shared with everyone afterwards. We'll send a link to everyone who signed up and the presentations as well. We'd love to hear from all of you. We'd love to hear your feedback. Tell us what you think. You can email me at coordinator@growahead.org. And thank you to Edouard, Precious, and Ryan for your time. We really loved learning more about your work and for sharing these strategies and insights on how we can scale up regenerative ag worldwide. So thanks, guys. See you next time. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.